Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to our ongoing webinar series 2022. We've had a bit of a break over the summer to enjoy the sun, I guess, most of the time, and actually now in autumn a little bit of rain. So all's good on the farming front, I hope, for everybody. But we're back again into our series. This is the first one. We'll be running these through the autumn and the winter as we did last year on a monthly basis. So keep your eyes peeled for what's coming up in the future. We are very pleased once again and grateful to Barclays for sponsoring our series of webinars. So a big thank you to them again. It really is really helpful. And we really welcome their support. Looking ahead, we're looking at various things around DEFRA's future policy, around carbon credits, and anything else after New Year that you might want to discuss. Please let Julia or myself or George know if you have a particular burning topic that you think we should be discussing. We're very happy to do that. I should just remind everybody that these webinars are recorded and are available on our YouTube site and the website after the webinar. Obviously, I've touched on the fact that we've had a bit of a break over the summer and harvest and the weather. Clearly, the very biggest event of the year happened a couple of weeks ago with our Chief Executive, George Dunn, being rewarded for his sterling efforts in working for the TFA for 25 years. And I'm sure many of you will know that George was awarded with a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Farmers Weekly, which is not only very well deserved, but a great credit to all the work that George has done for the organisation and continues to do for the organisation and tenant farmers, and indeed, I think, the agricultural industry. So a big thank you to George, and a very well deserved award. I have to say it was quite a task to keep the evening secret from him, so he wasn't aware he was going to get an award. But I'm reliably informed by Sharon, and I hear his daughter Alex, that they just concluded that he's really quite stupid, so he didn't really pick up on any of the thing. I don't think we can second that thought, though. But a really massive thank you to George for all the work that he's done. It really is massively appreciated. You might be able to see, I don't know whether you've got it close to hand, George, have you? It's an enormous disc. I don't think you can wear it around your neck, can you? I think it's yeah. So
thank you very much, Mark. I do appreciate it. And yes, I was entirely dim. I had no idea, despite everything that was going on around me. So yeah, completely dim. So thanks very much indeed. Very kind.
No, I think it's very well deserved. Anyway, on to the topic of our first webinar, which is what's in the report from the ROC Review and Agricultural Tenancies. Many of you will know that we are extremely grateful to Baroness Rock for heading up the report on agricultural tenancies, which was instigated back at the beginning of the year when George Eustace, who some of you may remember a couple of Secretary of States ago, was very keen on seeing where tenancies fitted into the new regime. And we're really grateful to Baroness Rock for heading this up. And I hope many of you will have read it, and certainly there are some really good recommendations in there. And I think it's a good thing for all of us to keep highlighting what the information is in there whenever you can, because the very worst thing that can happen to any of these reports, I think, is that they go in the drawer having been read and get referred to in 10 years' time, where everybody goes, oh yeah, that was a great report, but nothing's actually been done as a result of it. And given the environment that we are now working in, with the movement obviously in the way from BPS onto ELMS and whatever else comes after that, we really do have an opportunity to fit the tenanted sector and to make really positive changes. And so much of what's in the report, I think, is of massive value to how tenancies will continue to thrive going forward. So Baroness Rock is obviously with us this evening. She's going to give us a bit of an overview of the report, what it tells us, and some of the really key bits of information and recommendations that it's come up with. And then after that, we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. If you could use the Q&A button, which I think is probably at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat box for questions, we'll try and go through those. We've got a few that have been sent in prior to the event, but we'll pick those up after we've heard from Baroness Rock, and George will join us as a panelist at that point to answer questions too. So without further ado, let's go straight on and welcome Baroness Rock once again to the evening, and I'll pass over to you to let us know what was in your report.
Mark, thank you very, very much indeed. It's always an absolute privilege to be speaking with the TFA, and I'm incredibly grateful to you. The first thing I want to do is that I really want to thank all the TFA members. I am sure that there are many people on this call, or many people who will be watching the recording, who have either spoken to me, who are involved in roundtables, who we had written submissions from tenant farmers, and I'm incredibly grateful because, you know, your honesty, your feedback, your thoughts, your opinions, your solutions, ideas, they were absolutely invaluable to the input into this report. And we wouldn't have been able to do it without the very clear and proactive voice of tenant farmers across England. So I just want to put on record my huge gratitude to everyone. And the TFA were very instrumental in putting together some fantastic events over the course of 9 months. I did say to my children, who are in their 20s now, I feel as though I've had my third child, because it was 9 months from beginning to end. But I'm very, very grateful to all of you. Before I go into the details of the report, I just thought we could take a moment to reflect on the policy situation we are in, particularly around this changing political landscape. And, you know, we all know that the farming sector has not seen this level of change in more than a generation. And the Environment Act laid down statutory targets for environmental outcomes, tree planting, net zero, reversing biodiversity loss, cleaner air, cleaner water. And I think that everybody would agree that they are worthy and necessary goals. We all of us, and I, as you all know, am a tenant farmer myself, we all want to leave the land in better health for future generations. But I am asked the same question quite often: where is the mention of food security? And I firmly believe that government must get the balance right between food security, food production, and the environment. I've heard time and time again that farming should be done with nature. Well, of course it should. Healthy soils grow better crops and are more resilient to climate change. Biodiversity can provide habitats for pollinators and support pest control. We as farmers all know that. So from one of the very early recommendations that the working group made, which we did when we were going side by side with DEFRA as opposed to the publication of the report, was that DEFRA has very clearly shifted its narrative on the new schemes to be more around food production alongside nature and the environment. So that was a very early win for the working group. And obviously this balance is much more accurate. It's, you know, nature is foundational to farming. But DEFRA, we believe, can and should go further by defining food security as a public good. And the review is recommending this. So, as Mark mentioned, the Secretary of State set me 2 clear objectives for the review in January this year. The first was to look at how government financial schemes should be open, accessible and flexible to tenant farmers. And the second was to look at the longer term changes that would ensure a robust, vibrant and thriving agricultural tenancy sector for the future. And that is clearly what we did. As we all know, half of England's agricultural land has a tenant farmer as a custodian. And we tenant farmers are vital to the nation's food production alongside the delivery of environmental outcomes. So we took a very balanced and fair approach. We spoke to landlords, we spoke to tenants, and we spoke to land agents. We took evidence from a broad range of organisations and institutions. We had written submissions, we had roundtables, as I've mentioned. And I was very clear at the beginning that the working group had to be a mix of landlords, landowners, land agents, and tenant farmers. Over the past 8/9 months, I've travelled across England, meeting a great number of farming people, and some of you will have been in the rooms that we went when we had our meetings. From the back room of a lovely pub in Alnwick, a barn in Sussex, beautiful estates in Yorkshire and Cornwall. I've been really privileged to have seen the deep commitment that our agricultural communities have in creating a farming future and a thriving countryside for all of us. Now, we all know that every landlord is different, every tenant farmer is different, every farm is different. They all have different aims and objectives, but all will benefit from working together and having positive relationships. There is strength and resilience in this diversity, and we want to open up a way to have more diversity to grow our rural economy. So the review found that one thing was very clear from speaking to landlords and tenants. We agree on much more than we disagree. We agree that collaboration and open discussions are the foundation of a good relationship. We agree that we are stewards of the land for the generations to come. We agree that farming can and must happen alongside improving our environment. And we agree that whatever public schemes come out, landlords and tenants both need to benefit. Let's be clear, landlords do best when their tenants are thriving, and tenants do best when the landlord is engaged and willing. And because the tenanted sector is the backbone of the rural economy, we have a social responsibility to the wider rural community to ensure that the rural economy is growing, thriving and vibrant with diverse businesses, of which we are very much a part of. On the subject of social responsibility, a lot of land in England is managed by institutions and charities and trusts, and we spoke to a lot of them, and they are governed in part by requirements of fiduciary duty. Now, this would normally constrain the focus on how land assets are managed to be around purely financial return. But we did discover that there was recently a new case law. And in awakening to the risks posed by climate change and biodiversity, the term fiduciary duty is beginning to encompass actions that can deliver resilient land assets. So trusts and institutions, some of you might have them as landlords, are now well positioned to place the considerations of social responsibility at the heart of their governance and their operations, leading the way on how land is managed for nature and for food. And that is very clearly the synergies with new government schemes. Working on the review, I have seen and visited some fantastic examples of collaborative relationships. Indeed, the working group itself was an example of this collaboration. We reached consensus agreement on recommendations between the key members of the group, which were representatives from the CLA, the NFU, Harper Adams, the Duchy of Cornwall, Savills, and of course, the TFA. And I particularly want to thank George Dunn as one of our members of the working group. I was completely overwhelmed by all of our members and their knowledge, their passion, their dedication. And I really can't thank them enough for the many, many, many hours they committed to the working group. They inspired me with thoughts, ideas, and considered opinion, and all of this went into the review. When we spoke to landlords and tenants who were working together, they all had one thing in common. They had open and regular discussions about their plans and how they could support each other. And here, the role of the land agent is vital, often setting the tone of the landlord-tenant relationship. Creating and maintaining a positive and constructive dialogue needs to be the norm and not the mindset of the minority. Our recommendations on land agents reflect this. Throughout the process, we were very much a critical friend to DEFRA. We worked closely with the policy teams to ensure a deeper understanding of the challenges as we face them, especially those of the tenant farmer. I've already spoken about collaboration, and you will see that it's a key theme throughout the entire review. But when I drew up the scope of this review with George Eustace, we both wanted to ensure that it was as broad as possible. So we included, and you will see, chapters and recommendations for the new elm schemes, productivity grants, tree planting, and net zero grants, new entrants, private environmental markets, and areas for future consideration, such as tax and legislation. In the many, many roundtables with tenants and landlords that I did around the country, we touched on every single one of those topics. And they very clearly then formed the narrative and the chapters of the review. The working group was clear. Elms schemes need to be open and accessible for tenant farmers. Our recommendations on scheme design will provide DEFRA with exact solutions of how they can do that. DEFRA has also rolled out a number of productivity schemes in the last year: the Farming Investment Fund, the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, the Farming Transformation Fund, and I'm sure that others might well follow. One thing that our review calls for is a fund that invests in the foundational assets and infrastructure on farms. The last time such a government fund existed, would you believe it, was in the 70s and 80s. It is time to renew those assets. Our journey that we are on together as a nation across sectors is also one to net zero. The government has made commitments, and they are big commitments, to tree planting to help us get to that point. But without tenant farmers being able to contribute to these goals, we will surely fall short. The review points out that if net zero is the destination, then trees are only part of the answer. Our recommendations around tree planting recommend that the UCO grants should have screening criteria that prevents high-grade agricultural land receiving planting grants. And to counteract the incentive for landlords to take land out of a tenancy to plant trees, DEFRA should consider ways to prevent landlords entering schemes for at least 12 months where they have resumed land from a tenant farmer for the purposes of tree planting. Now, this is similar to the recommendation made for the environmental land management schemes, but we believe it was important that it also applies to woodland schemes. And I'm delighted to tell you that this recommendation is absolutely supported by the Woodland Trust. We should be encouraging other solutions for removing carbon from the atmosphere as well. Grasslands and soil carbon have huge potential to be carbon sinks and take us closer to the net zero goal, and these can be done by tenant farmers. This brings me on to the topic of natural capital. Now, DEFRA has indicated that it wants to grow these markets and make them a new revenue stream in the land use sector. But from talking to NGOs, private investors, banks, and experts in this field, what we can really say, and what we found as the report progressed, that this really is the Wild West, complete with cowboy carbon codes. I do want these markets to develop, and I do think that they are a huge opportunity for landlords and tenants, but they must be developed with care. DEFRA is looking at how they set the rules, and the recommendations in the review will help them take due care for the tenanted sector as these markets develop. One of the many things that I was completely heartened to see at the roundtables was the number of young farmers who showed up. Bringing new entrants into any sector brings new ideas, new energy, adaptability, and sometimes new risk. But we did find that there is no clear vision for new entrants in the agricultural tenanted sector. A thought I had on this was maybe that actually it is an industry issue and not one for government policy. But speaking to young farmers, I found there is space for government to work with the industry to incentivise and support young farmers into the tenanted sector. New entrants face the barriers of access to land, access to finance, and access to experience. Our recommendations in the review will minimise these barriers for new entrants. But what use is trying to get new entrants in when there's no real incentive for sitting tenants to retire or for more land to come forwards? The lump sum exit scheme is just not fit for purpose. We've seen no uptick in land coming to the market as a result, suggesting it has been of limited value to new entrants. Providing a viable route of farming goes hand in hand with new entrants coming into farming. Over the last decade, we have seen huge losses in county farms. For many, these were the entry point to farming and de-risked new entrants when they wanted to grow their businesses and enter the private sector. So our recommendations look at how DEFRA needs to consider how it can work with industry to secure, first of all, a pipeline of land to enter the let sector, and secondly, a pipeline of new entrants to take on that land. Broadly speaking, our recommendations fell into two categories. The shorter term ones that DEFRA can action immediately, and these focused on areas of scheme design and opening them up to tenant farmers. Indeed, the now previous Secretary of State, in his response to the review, said, and I quote him, "As we look at how we best develop our environmental schemes, we will make sure that the needs of tenant farmers remain central to our plans." This is a commitment made by DEFRA. The longer term recommendations are for DEFRA to action over a broader time period with proportionate consultation and consideration. Specifically, two areas that can unlock many of the recommendations are tax and data. Almost all the landlords we spoke to agreed that tax was a key driver of behaviour, whether they were making investments or letting land in the first place. Now, we know that DEFRA and Treasury are looking at APR in the face of the new schemes and how land managed for environmental purposes is classified under the current definition of agriculture. But we recommend that the conditions of APR need to be fit for purpose for what is wanted from the land. Our tax recommendations are designed to improve things for both landlords and tenants so that we're better placed to deliver on food security and environmental outcomes. I also mentioned data. And as we were working with DEFRA, the working group discovered that there was a real blocker was DEFRA's handle on data in the tenanted sector. We were often asked what the uptake rate was on countryside stewardship options in tenants, or even what options they were doing, or how many tenants had counter signatures for their agreements. None of this information is available from DEFRA or from the RPA. What is not measured is not seen. How can DEFRA measure the success of schemes for tenant farmers if they do not know what land is tenanted? This is one of the important recommendations we've made to DEFRA. It will underpin the ability of DEFRA to deliver many of the scheme design recommendations so that DEFRA, the RPA, and the National Audit Office can all be confident that the right amount of taxpayers' money is going to the right amount of people for the right actions. Now, the ROC review is now in DEFRA's hands to respond. It was published last week, actually the week before, apologies. And we have a new Secretary of State, Therese Coffey. Now, Therese has worked in DEFRA in the past, and she has a very good understanding of the department. I have known and worked with her for many years, and I'm confident she will be a very strong Secretary of State and a champion of the farming communities. I've already been in contact with her hours after she became DEFRA Secretary. But I do think this is an opportunity with a new DEFRA Secretary for us in the industry to push forwards on the agricultural transition with renewed focus and vigour, and the ideas that all of us have put into the review. Now, as of tonight, Mark Spencer is our farming minister, and I sincerely hope that he will remain in post. He is a friend and a strong ally. We recommended early on in the process that the farming minister kept the tenancy portfolio, agricultural tenancy portfolio, in his role. And Mark Spencer confirmed that that was the case. And we will ensure that that is part of a very strong recommendation going forward. Mark has been around the political stage for some time. I've worked with him across government. He has forged strong relationships with many rural MPs. Whose constituents are all like ourselves, facing the issues that I touched on earlier. And in our Prime Minister, we have a Prime Minister who has a rural constituency. He told me, and I don't know if this is correct, so apologies, this is not quite right, but I believe that he has, his constituency has one of the largest areas of tenant farmers across England. He is completely cognizant and aware of the challenges that tenant farmers face, and I believe we have a real friend and ally in our new Prime Minister. For my part, I will work with the new Secretary of State and DEFRA over the coming months to act on the recommendations. I will be emphasising that these recommendations will, one, encourage longer-term tenancy agreements that will provide stability and assurance so tenants can access schemes, make long-term business plans, and invest in their holding. Two, allow tenants to access new public and private schemes through flexibility. And three, create incentives for tenants and landlords to invest and improve the knowledge and infrastructure within the tenanted sector. I've been really privileged to have met many of you on my journey and to have had the opportunity to travel all over the country for this review. I've seen the most beautiful and diverse mosaics of our landscape. And like every good farmer, I've been incredibly nosy when I've gone onto other people's farms to have a look at what everybody else is doing. We farmers are really proud of the landscape shaped by time and the efforts of us farmers working with natural processes. I know we are proud of the landscapes we have in this country. I know that what we want is best for our land, what is best for our businesses, our communities, and our next generations. And I do believe that by working together, we can ensure a vibrant and thriving agricultural tenanted sector that benefits us all for the future. Thank you, Mark. I hope that wasn't too long because I'm very keen for questions.
Absolutely not. No, it's bang on timing wise. Very, very good. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that. And I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for not only putting the report together, but by putting the report together in such a speedy manner, to have managed to pull together the information, travel the country as you did, and come up with the recommendations that you have in, I think I'll be right in saying it was about a 6-month process in the end. I think the report is something that in many cases might have taken several years to put together. But I think it highlights a lot of the things that I think many of us are aware are really serious issues for the sector. And I think those three key points that you drew out at the end there about longer term tenancies, something which of course George has championed for 25 years, George, I think, and still continues to do so. Clearly getting a fair, equitable and ease of access to the new schemes, which is something that we are all in the organisation very engaged with DEFRA trying to do. And thirdly, getting investment into farms. I think those three areas are so important to the long-term success and sustainability and viability of the sector. So if nothing else, if we manage to tick those three boxes, we've made an extremely good start. So I think, I think we should all be incredibly grateful to you and the team. And I think it's worth pointing out, as you did, the mix right across the board that you had on the team of the review, because I think it adds real weight to the report that this isn't just, if you like, a sort of tenanted focused group of people saying, oh well, we want all this for tenants. You had the CLA representative, the NFU, you had Alistair Martin from the Duchy of Cornwall, some really top people on there. So I think that adds real credibility to the review. I think it is a good time now to start and ask a few questions. We've got a few sent forward, and George is going to join us and answer some of these as well. You touched near the end. I'll ask this sort of for myself, but I suspect, and I see we had a member from Hampshire ask a pretty similar question, and you touched on it, but clearly the report landed at a time of intense political sort of turmoil, shall we say, interest, chaos, whatever you want to describe it as. And we've kind of landed on the other side of that, but only very recently. Clearly, the initial report was commissioned by George Eustace as a Secretary of State. How do you think that the Prime Minister, the new Secretary of State, and perhaps quite importantly, the Chancellor might welcome or take on board some of these recommendations. What's your kind of view on that? And George, maybe you want to add a little bit in there as well.
Mark, thank you. I think it's a really, really important and good question. I mean, let's be clear. We have been through a very, very difficult political time, but I do believe now that we are firmly, sort of back into hopefully a little bit more of a steady ship. I mentioned the Prime Minister. He is in a rural constituency. He does spend a lot of time with his constituents, and indeed I went to his constituency during the review, and many of his tenant farmers tell me that they were have very engaged and proactive conversations with him about some of the challenges in the sector. So I'm extremely optimistic that our Prime Minister recognises and understands the importance of tenant farmers and the agricultural tenancy sector. With regards to the new ministers in DEFRA with Therese, I'm extremely confident that that she will be fully and very proactively engaged with all of us in terms of the sector. She's unbelievably hardworking and brilliantly engaged with everything. So I'm optimistic about that. And with the Chancellor, I mean, let's be clear. I have spoken to 4 chancellors about this review now. But I have spoken to all 4 of them, and I am very confident that the conversations with the Treasury, with officials, with the new ministers will continue. So I have to say I'm actually very optimistic that the recommendations, well, first of all, I think they're already being taken seriously, because the feedback that that we've had as a working group has been very powerful and strong, and I'm being delighted by the support that we've received across the wider industry, for some very powerful voices, from a lot of the NGOs, from some very senior figures in the industry, and from pretty much all the organisations across the industry, who've all actually come out with a huge amount of support. So it's landed well. It's been well received by the politicians and by the officials. So I'm feeling, I'm going to say I'm confident, Mark, that this is being taken seriously and that the recommendations will be looked at properly and hopefully. I will be working very hard to ensure that the foot doesn't come off the gas.
Yeah, well, that's really good, and it's great to hear that you feel confident that we can get that engagement, because I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I think not only just for tenancies, but also for the industry as a whole.
Absolutely.
George, do you want to add?
Yeah, Mark, if I may, I think we are absolutely incredibly fortunate to have somebody of the ilk of Baroness Rock heading this up. She has been phenomenal, both during the process and since the delivery of the report. I have never known a chair of a working group like this to be so over the whole political situation, in terms of talking to absolutely everybody she comes into contact with about this report, and not allowing them to get away without having got a link to it, or understood what the recommendations are. And I think if we've got any chance of getting this over the line with government, it's because Kate is at the forefront of this. She is absolutely phenomenal. We also had a really good secretary, a guy called Al Megji, who was, in my view, in the 25 years I've been involved in this sort of work, the best secretary we had for this group, for this type of group. And he wrote well, he understood well, and he got everything together. So this report hangs together well. Its recommendations are well thought through. They're well evidenced. They reflect what I hope our members see on the ground. We have a great advocate on behalf of the report in Kate. And I think we have every chance of seeing this come to fruition, because actually there's an awful lot of quick and easy wins in here for DEFRA if they were just pick it up, understand it, and run with it. So yeah, absolutely, we think this has got every chance.
And George, am I right in thinking that you're going in to see the Secretary of State quite soon?
Yes, Kate. So obviously we had the announcement of the new Secretary of State yesterday, and we wrote to her immediately on her appointment. And happily today, the private office have been in touch, wanting a meeting with us on Friday. So we haven't yet got a time for that, but yeah, we will be into DEFRA, and we have said the top item on her agenda should be the ROC review. So we are absolutely going in there with this report in our hands.
Great, thanks, George. Just moving on, I think it's great to hear that we should get good, or we are getting good response from within DEFRA and ministers and whatever, and we won't take our foot off the gas in trying to do that. But interestingly, and Robert Sturdy has asked this in the question section, that he noticed the article in the Farmers Weekly, the comments from the CLA, which were perhaps a little bit negative. And he asked, have they fully engaged and committed to this? And it is, I mean, we have frequent discussions with the CLA, and throughout the process, we were aware they were a little bit nervous of it. I must admit, from my point of view, having read it, I'm particularly the emphasis on the importance of landlord-tenant collaboration and the ability to drive that forward. And there are clearly some very good examples of where that works. I was a little bit surprised by some of the comments too. I wonder if you could comment on where they sit on that, and George, you might have a view on that too.
Maybe I can come in on that one first, if I may. And obviously, I'm in a difficult position, having been a member of the working group and now talking as the chief executive of the Tenant Farmers Association, who, as you are well aware, has been lobbying the CLA and talking to the CLA about these issues for many years. What I can say about the process was, given the sensitivities of the issues here, and given the fact that we were talking about some very serious matters, Kate did take the opportunity of regularly going to see the CLA to ensure that they were aware what we were talking about, obviously behind closed doors, because it was important to ensure that there were no surprises when the report came out, that they were clearly aware of the issues that were being flagged up to us as a working group. No other organization had that sort of access that Kate allowed the CLA to have. So it's to Kate's, Kate should be congratulated for bringing the CLA along. So to my mind, and Kate can't say this, but I will, I was disappointed with the negative remarks that were made by the CLA when the report was issued, because they issued their own survey indicating what good landlord-tenant relationships look like. And what we have in the report is actually a program which nudges the landlord and tenant community towards the sort of picture that the CLA were putting out in their report of what was good. So, on average, 8-year agreements where landlords were talking regularly to tenants about diversification and about entering elm schemes and not taking land away from them in order to put land into schemes themselves. All of that was mirrored in the report. So it was a bit disappointing that the CLA decided to take a bit of a negative approach. But as you know, Mark, you and I are going to see the CLA on Friday before we see the Secretary of State. So we'll be talking about those issues with them when we meet them, because I don't think there's anything in this report that the CLA should be concerned about. It's about establishing good landlord-tenant relationships.
George,
no,
I think
absolutely. I don't know, Baroness, what do you have a?
I think, Mark, can I just, I mean, I don't want to, I think, can I just add two things? I think, as I said, one of our guiding principles was to get the balance right between landlords and tenants. I'm absolutely firmly of the opinion that we are two sides of the same coin. And I think I've probably used that phrase consistently throughout this review, and probably many of your members have heard me say it. We had 70+ recommendations, and the CLA have been a little bit uncomfortable on 3 of them. So I feel that on balance, actually, the majority of things, they didn't really have an issue with, and we did agree many things in collaboration with them. And as George said, I thought it was incredibly important to engage with the CLA throughout the process. Obviously they were going to have some concerns, and I entirely respect them for doing that. But it was a very good and collaborative and consensus-driven approach that we took. And, I want to pay real tribute here to the members of the working group. Simon Dixon-Smith was our representative from the CLA. And, it was fantastic to work with, him, to work with Alistair Martin, who is as you say, a landlord for the Duchy, to work with Emily Norton from Savills. And we really did reach consensus. So for me, yes, perhaps a little disappointing that they were a little bit negative, but I'm highly respectful of the CLA and everything that they do. And I think that if it was only a few issues, I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yeah, no, I think on the whole we certainly have a lot more in common with the CLA than we do differences. We wouldn't expect to agree with them on everything or them with us, but hopefully we'll learn a bit more on Friday when we meet them, and I think we have generally had a pretty good relationship with them. Whilst we're on about the sort of landlord things, there's a number of questions coming in, and I'd also say previously, but perhaps if I could just pick up on the question that highlights why did you choose 8 years as the point at which landowners should continue to be eligible for APR when we as an organisation, when the TFA has been arguing for 10. And George, I think, touched on that slightly just in his comment about the CLA and their survey. So perhaps we could just cover that, and maybe at the same time, I could just add also onto what actions you think should be taken to support better lengths of term for farm tenancies. We've got a question from the University at Cirencester around that as well. If I could sort of lump all those together.
Okay, so the first was 8 years, correct? And the second was about actions.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I know the TFA have said 10 years. I worked on the agriculture bill, and I had regular briefings from the TFA about 10 years. And to be honest, this was quite a sensitive area to get consensus on from the working group. But although we did all believe that actually tax does drive behaviour and it was an important lever to pull, so we all agreed on the principle. It was just the question of length. So what would I say? Setting the bar at 8 years reflects basically the findings of the CLA survey. All their members have on average of sort of 8 years, and I thought if we took that, it sort of balances the CLA survey with the recommendation to actually try and put that through. I'd rather have had the recommendation with 8 years based on the CLA survey than not have the recommendation at all. And we did reach the consensus on that. I think it also reflects the fact that, unlike, let's say, Ireland, England already has a landlord-tenant system where the quality and the length of lettings does need to improve. So we need to sort of do that step-by-step process. So that was the sort of the reasoning behind the 8 years. Your second question was about actions, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think we all of us, want longer term agreements. We want tenants to be able to diversify, access multiple sources of funding, but without impacting the landlord's interests, so that both the landlord, and the tenant can benefit. So as a principal recommendation, we did say that DEFRA must make sure that all environmental land management schemes and productivity schemes are accessible and open to tenant farmers. So that was an absolute core principle for us. And because we did realise from an early sort of process that collaboration and sort of landlord and tenant relationship was the keystone of a sort of a vibrant sector. So what I was, and that was a consistent theme actually throughout the round tables. So really what we want to do is we want to sort of dial into that direction of travel. So we want to try and use the design scheme for the sort of the Elms things and some tax levers to really try and push towards what is a really key objective, which is longer term tenancies, which we believe are mutually beneficial for both landlords and for tenants. And can I just say, actually, going around the country, it was a really key question that I asked landlords and tenants. And I don't think I had a single landlord who said, no, I don't think you're right, Kate. I don't think we should have longer tenancies. I actually do. I do like the idea of longer tenancies. I think it's right. But the problem that we did discover is that some of the short-term tenancies that are happening at the moment are actually driven by the uncertainties around the public schemes and what they'll pay, who can enter them, and who gets paid. So if we can get the schemes right, I'm really hopeful that will push towards longer term agreements, which I genuinely believe is absolutely right for every single party. The other thing just to say is, I think that there's a really important role for the land agents here. I think the land agents need to be actually sitting down and thinking what is right for their landlord, and what is right for their landlord is a longer term tenancy. George, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Mark, obviously the 10-year tax situation was one of the red lines of the TFA, and I was a bit of a pain in the backside to Kate because I wouldn't move, and you know, it was one of those issues that she really had to hear me bellyache about the fact that we were pushing for 10 years and we wouldn't back away from 10 years. But actually, Kate was quite persuasive in her discussions with the working group, and obviously on this particular issue, given that the average length of term on an FBT is currently only 3 years, and where 90% of all new tenancies are let for 5 years or less, if we could move it up to 8 years, that would be a significant achievement. And actually, the other bit of the recommendation is that landlords should be able to lock in their capital taxation position from day one of their lease, which in itself should encourage landlords to let for longer, because the longer that the lease is in place, the longer they know they're safe on their capital taxation position. So I felt it right to back away from the TFA's position on 10 years. Obviously, the TFA can continue to argue for 10 years. It's not, we haven't signed the TFA up to 8 years forever, but you know, the consensus was around 8, and if we can get it to 8, then great. If we can get it longer than that, then great too. And I think Kate's touched on a really important point in terms of the land agent community. Too often, we see the flexibility and the freedom of contract that the 1995 Agricultural Tenancies Act provides used only in very minor proportions. And that's because land agents simply use the shortest term agreements that are in their drawers. When a tenant wants a piece of land, they pull it out and give it to them for 2 or 3 years. They just don't think about what's right for the land, what's right for the client. And there are recommendations in the report which are there to hold land agents to account in a better way than we have been able to date, to have that longer term perspective, both for their private clients, but also for the public good elements that Kate was talking about in terms of the new scheme. So yeah, I'm afraid Kate did have a bit of a problem with me on this issue, but she persuaded me to go with the 8, and I think, as I said, if we can get 8, given that we've got 3 at the moment, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly one of the, it's almost the easiest win is, in order to get schemes accessible to tenants, it's to allow them to have longer term tenancies, which allow them to meet more than the length of time of the ALMS agreement. So, you know, it's almost a bit of a no-brainer, but it clearly takes quite a lot to get that result. But I think we can all agree that having longer term tenancies is a significant advantage to a tenant running a business. Perhaps I could just pick up now, and there's a heap of questions around this, as we might expect. So I won't sort of I'll try to sort of bring them all together rather than ask each individual one. But certainly in the report, there was quite a lot about the role of land agents within the industry and how they operate, and some recommendations around better, perhaps even legislation about how they behave. There was certainly something about the RICS and complaints procedures, which a member on Dartmoor's asked about. I wonder, without being too specific, whether you could just comment about what you found when you were going around and what you think the right way for agents to behave is, but more importantly, not just the right way, but how is it get enforced that agents do understand their role in this process? Because certainly looking on the Q&A and talking to members, I think it's a fairly common theme, and it seems to be a recurring theme, that land agents are a bit of a blocker sometimes to good landlord-tenant relations, as well as a whole load of other access to schemes and so on. So there was a really good section in the report. Perhaps you could just cover that off for us, Rock. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, Mark, I mean, look, let's be clear. Going around the country, it was very clear that the role of the agent in the landlord-tenant relationship was regularly quoted as a source of tension, and we heard some very, very difficult stories of some very sort of some what I would call really sort of not appropriate behaviour. You know, I mean. Lots of people said, oh, you know, it can actually just, the agents can actually just end up being a wedge between the relationship, and that, you know, they bring sort of different levels of anxiety. And, you know, we all know that, you know, there's an issue around mental health in our sector as well. And it's totally driven by financial targets. Now, we believe it should be common practice that agents are facilitators and mediators in a relationship between the landlords and tenant. And so we put sort of 3 recommendations together. The first was around that DEFRA should be examining ways to improve the licensing of land agents so that performance and behaviour can be scrutinised and held to account. Now, we didn't go as far as regulation. There have been others in the industry who have raised that, but we decided not to go as far as that. But we do think that there should be some looking at some form of licensing. We also asked that DEFRA look and work with the Department for Levelling Up, and I'm absolutely delighted that Michael Gove has gone back into Levelling Up, because I had this conversation with him when he was there around the reform of RICS, you know, which would review it, because as you know, they'd sort of look at their Royal Charter, you know, to better ensure that the RICS organisation is providing public good, and central to that must be improvement in the performance of land agents. And the third thing that we raised was that we think that DEFRA should appoint a tenant farmer commissioner, like an ombudsman, really, for the sector. You know, there are other sectors who have ombudsmen, and you know, that would be a position where if there was a problem or an issue that either a landlord or a tenant, it's not necessarily for this commission would not just be for tenant farmers, it would be for the sector, you know, could go and see if there were issues to ensure sort of fairness in the sector, and also have a remit to sort of look and examine the dispute process. The thing that I'm very pleased about is that I have been regularly now talking to what I would call the sort of the key influencers in the land agent sector. You will all know who they are. I'm sure many of us deal with them on a regular basis. And I have been very encouraged that they have recognised that they do need to look at their behaviour and try and change to be more of a mediator and facilitator between landlord and tenant in a positive way, and not just around rent reviews or dispute processes. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that we're going to turn this around overnight, but if we can, if we have this, and if anybody has an issue with an agent on this call, that they can refer to the review to say, you know, this is something that we should all be working together and collaborative for, and land agents should play their part in that. I believe we definitely can move the dial, but we've got to ensure that the land agents do this proactively. Otherwise, you know, who knows what government might do.
Yeah.
George?
Yeah, Mark, there are land agents and there are land agents.
That is true. Sorry, George, you're quite right.
And, you know, when you look at some of the in-house land agents, they tend to be the ones that you know are going to do the right thing for the long-term benefit of the estate, of their client, and of the landlord-tenant relationship. You know, if you look, let's mention, if you look at the Duchy of Cornwall, they have their, their in-house land stewards. And yes, we know that the estate needs its pound of flesh in order to provide the money that's required for the Duke of Cornwall and his growing family. But it's done in a way which is collegiate and in a way which brings the tenants along on that journey. And we've seen, you know, with the Duchy of Lancaster is another example where they used to use external agents, which perhaps weren't performing as well as they should have done. And the Duchy of Lancaster has decided to pull those agents back into house to give them the ethos of the Duchy of Lancaster, and working really well. And let me big up a local estate to where the TFA head office is, the Englefield estate, where the agent, Edward Crooks from the Englefield estate, invited me in to speak to their tenants without the agents present to talk about issues around landlord and tenant and access to schemes and things. So land agents know how to behave, but there are plenty out there who choose not to behave appropriately. And I think that's what our recommendations were aimed at, to bring everybody up to the same standard.
Yeah.
The CAV has a really useful motto, which is do what's right, come what may. And too often the evidence that we were seeing through the review and what I've seen in 25 years of experience with the TFA is that land agents use the leverage that they've got in situations which is inappropriate. And we just need to make sure that they all live up to that motto, do what's right, come what may. And the sorts of recommendations that are in the report will help us to achieve that.
George, can I just add that, sorry, the one thing I forgot to add is that we also actually put forward about having a code of practice, which we would get designed by industry, which everybody would sign up to. And I think that's something that that I know that DEFRA are very keen on. And I think that that's something that we can take through. You know, we don't need DEFRA to respond to that. We actually, as an industry and as a sector of all of us together, if we get a good code of practice put in, you know, we could really drive behaviour on this. So that's you know, it is something that I think that is achievable. And I'm hopeful that there are some land agents who are going to take the challenge up and drive it forward.
Yeah, I think it feels to me slightly that whilst in the same way that the new environment that we're sort of dealing with post BPS gives an opportunity to focus on, or a greater opportunity, should I say, to focus on longer term tenancies, in the same way, it's a real opportunity, a sort of almost a once in a lifetime opportunity to get these relationships between land agents, landlords and tenants right, because where we get that right, then actually the positive benefit to everybody, not only just an individual farming business, but probably to society and the wider community, is so much greater than where those relationships are non-collaborative and you know, adversarial. So it would be really nice to see that change in the land agent community. And I think it's important to pick up George's point that there are land agents and there are land agents. So we shouldn't tar everybody with the same brush on this one. I'm really conscious of time, but I'm going to just shoehorn one last question in. And I'll also just reiterate that thank you very much to everybody for all the questions, both pre and during the session. We'll do our very best to answer those through the website. I'm committing Julia, George and Baroness Rock to do that without having asked them, but I presume that will happen. So hopefully you will get an answer to your question. But perhaps I could just shoehorn in, there's a couple of common things here. Do you think that the review and its recommendations will be able to significantly influence that there is sufficient funding coming out of the new schemes, and also that it stops significant areas of land being taken up for simply just for tree, or sort of taken back in hand for simply, you know, tree planting, rewilding and so on, which are common themes outside of the review. But I wonder whether you feel the review can significantly influence those things.
Thanks, Mark. So very quickly on the funding, you will see that the narrative completely shifted over the summer in terms of the funding. It was, as you know, a third for each of the ELMS things. I think that was a very quick and decisive win for the working group. We were very clear that the funding was not right. I think it's now less than 1% for landscape recovery. So I think that you know, the funding is ring fenced for this Parliament. You know, I am really pushing for a sense of urgency with DEFRA to start, you know, getting more of the standards out on the schemes, what the payment rates are going to be. I'm sure that the new Secretary of State will be looking at this with a sense of urgency. So I think there is the funding there, but we've got to get it in place quickly now. You know, we should be seeing more standards for the SFI coming out. The LNR, we're still waiting to hear, but we've got to, you know, this review has definitely sort of said there is a sense of urgency. Can you please get on with it in terms of, you know, so we will need clarity as businesses. You know, we need to see what's coming down the track. So that was on the funding. What was your other question? Sorry.
The other one was, how do we stop significant, or will it be able to stop significant areas of land getting taken back in hand for tree planting, rewilding, so being lost to agriculture?
Yeah. So on that, I think you will see that in our tree planting, and I think I alluded to it earlier, that we are quite clear that there needs to be, on tree planting, if there's tree planting on tenanted land, it needs to be in collaboration between the landlord and the tenant. The tenant has to agree it. And we have said, if we don't think that, if landlords are taking land back in hand for tree planting, they can't plant, the recommendation is that they shouldn't be having a grant for a 12-month period. Now, we did have a discussion about whether it was 12 months or 2 years or whatever it was, and we settled on 12 months as a group. But I think that, the balance between food production and environmental outcomes has been fully recognised now. So I would anticipate, and I'm hopeful that that balance will be right.
Right.
And Mark, can I just kick in?
Sure.
I think Kate again did a phenomenal job in getting that change in the budget split early doors, because it was a third. It was because of Kate's tenacity and the backing of the working group that we managed to convince DEFRA to step back from the landscape recovery being a third of the BPS budget, which would have been crazy in the grand scheme of things. It was the obvious thing to do was to pull that back. DEFRA is concerned about losing lots of land to non-food and non-food uses. And if you look at our recommendations and other things that DEFRA are saying, they're talking about how you bring together landscape recovery with food production. So it's not about just taking land out of production, it's about land sharing rather than land sparing as the way forward. And I think we're also seeing situations where the landlords are beginning to think twice about taking land back, particularly given the recommendations that we put in about pausing. And I can see there's a question about whether 12 months was a long enough period of time, but it just gives people the opportunity to think before they leap. And what we've been finding is land agents have been encouraging their clients to put themselves in the pole position to take advantage of some of these grants and schemes. We have said as an organization that landlords shouldn't be rewarded with public money for taking land back from tenant farmers. But that 12-month period, that quarantine period, just gives enough time for people actually to think, is there a better way to do this? Can we nudge them towards more collaboration rather than taking land back and putting it into schemes? So yeah, it's not perfect, but it just gives that breathing space.
And George, that's why one of our recommendations was around, joint applications, which is something that we did talk to the RPA about, because there's never been joint applications before. And the RPA were very clear that actually it was completely possible to do joint applications. And I think that is new. And that again comes back to the collaboration point. And, let's be honest, tree planting and net zero actions will need some form of ongoing management. And a tenant farmer can do that. George, I'm just going to say one thing, though. You're very kind to suggest that it was just us doing the changing the funding. I think there were many voices in the sector, so I think that there was a collaborative approach from across all organisations, not just us. But I think it was helpful that we as a group were able to work very closely. And actually, I do, Mark, if I may, just want to pay tribute to DEFRA and to the policy teams, and particularly to Janet Hughes and the Future Farming Programme, because they were really fantastic at being very open, transparent and honest with us about their thinking and their policy. And it was a real pleasure to work with them. And I don't say, as I've been in politics for a long time, and it really was. And they did a fantastic job at engaging with us, listening to us, taking on some of the challenges and then coming back to us and saying, we've heard you, we've listened to you. What can we do differently? And that this review was very much working, alongside DEFRA to ensure that we all had good outcomes. So I just wanted to pay tribute to the policy teams within DEFRA as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and it's really good to hear, because that's ultimately where we need these things to be landing and being able to change policy. So we have inevitably run over time a bit. I suspect we could spend a lot longer talking through the review and the recommendations and what it means for us. But What I would say is I would encourage anybody that hasn't read it to read it. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. There's some really good recommendations, but actually, just as a general overview of where we are in the industry and how we might go forward, I think it's a really good marker in the sand, apart from anything else. So I'd really encourage everybody, if you haven't read it, to read it. Obviously, a massive thanks to Baroness Rock for not only doing the report, but also for coming and talking to us about it this evening. I'm sure we'll want you to come back again and talk to us about the recommendations and how it's going in the future. But thank you very much for coming once again and giving up your evening to talk to us. As ever, a thank you to George as well for answering the questions and being a panelist on this. Just a reminder that our next webinar is on the 23rd of November, similar time at 7 o'clock, and it's about putting farm tenants in pole position to take advantage of natural capital opportunities. Some of you may have attended the webinar earlier in the year where Philip and Charles both spoke about biodiversity net gain and how that fitted into the industry. So that will be another really interesting session. And Charles was on the Baroness Rock review, I believe. So he may have some comments on that as well. So that's the 23rd of November for all of you that can make it. Just a big thank you to everybody for attending. Final thanks to Baroness Rock and George, and also to Barclays for sponsoring the event. And I hope you all have a good rest of the evening.